G'day Internet, and welcome back to another video. The Atari Lynx is a console I love. I had one as a kid. But let's not fool ourselves. When it was released, it wasn't a success. The Game Boy very much took that entire handheld console market and just ran away with it. But I do say that the Atari Lynx had some great games. I think it has one of the best ports of California games on almost any platform. But its main feature, its colour backlit display, isn't that fantastic these days. On a passive matrix nature that it is, it has really poor colour saturation and really bad blur. And its failure rate is pretty abysmal too. Up until now, we've really only had one option, and that's the McWill kit. However, being in Australia, by the time I add exchange rate, shipping and all the rest of it, it turns into a pretty expensive proposition. But what if I told you that there was now another option? Ben from Benvent Electronics. Now, if you know that name, you're probably from the Game Boy modding community. He's just released a new LCD for the colour Game Boy. Anyway, he's been working on his own LCD replacement for the Atari Lynx. And I've been lucky enough to get a prototype of one. So let's take a look at it. So this here is my Atari Lynx 2 with, as you can probably guess, a dead screen. So before we get to pulling this thing apart, let's see what Ben has sent me in the prototype. Here we have the LCD screen with the ribbon cable attached, various electronic doodads on the back. Now Ben tells me that a lot of this is going to be, well, at least neatened up on the final version, but like I said, this is just a prototype. I then have various little 3D printed mounts to help actually mount the screen in the case, and then some stick-on foam to put around the edge of the screen. So let's start by pulling apart my Atari Lynx. Now, if you've ever pulled apart an Atari Lynx, especially, I can't comment on the one because it's been years since I've had one, you'll know that removing the motherboard now starts to get a little tricky. We remove this screw for the battery holder and kind of angle it out around the battery terminal. And then tucked down here, we have two ribbon cables. Now, I generally find it's best to get a small flathead screwdriver and open up their clamps now very carefully. And they should then pop out. You can then lift up the screen, disconnect the speaker and the wire to the backlight, and we can put that aside. Once we've gotten to this point, we can then remove the screen, which is the 4 screws. And that then removes the screen, and we actually don't need this anymore. That can go away. What we're left with now is the empty front case with its glass, the ribbon cable for the buttons, and the speaker. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start heating up my soldering gun while we turn our attention back to the motherboard. Now, Ben tells me that there is various revisions of this motherboard, and the easiest way seems to be regarding whatever this RF heatsink shield is. Now, the area that we need to solder to is in this area and this area. So I'm going to neatly cut out here and out this way as well with a small pair of probably scissors. What we're going to have to do is desolder this one little point here. Now, obviously, when you are cutting this, make sure you don't scratch any traces or anything on the circuit board. So the points we're interested in, and I have a little cheat sheet next to me, are a various bunch of points along this row here, a couple up here, the last one just here, and the fourth one on the top row here. So let's get the camera a little closer, and we're going to start tinning those spots that we need. So the ones we want to tin along this row here is number 1, number 4 and number 5. And then starting on the next row, starting from number 3, we want 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. We then want the last pin here and the 4th pin just there. Ben advised me to actually pre-tin these because the solder in some of these is starting to get a little old. So this is the LCD screen. Now this is the ribbon cable, and I want a little bit of room to play with, so I think I want my cable about yay long. So with the help of some cutters, let's trim that off. Let's also trim the tips. Right, let's give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room by breaking these down a little. All right, and there we have our 11 wires that need soldering. So the first thing I'm going to do is carefully tin the tips of all these wires. And let's not forget the lonely one off the side. Okay, we now have some wires that are ready to solder to the motherboard. I'll turn it this way to make life a little easier. Starting with, now I believe, I'm pretty sure Ben has given me a bit of an old IDE cable, but that's okay, it works. Starting from this end here, I'm going to work my way around, but I'm going to do it in the order of the wire just to make life a little easier for myself. All right, in theory, that is all the soldering that is required. So one last thing before we put it all together. This inductor here is the inductor that actually controls or powers the original backlight. We can actually remove that and it will save us considerable battery power. Well, according to Ben it will, so I'm going to do what he says. Right, with it gingerly kind of all plugged in, let's see how we go. We have life. Oh yes. Righto, let me put all this together back together properly, and we'll see what it's like all in one piece. Ooh, I'm excited. Well, with it all back together, let's see how it goes. And here we go, Paperboy. Now, Ben hasn't just created an LCD screen, it does have some functionality. The backlight button now cycles through a series of brightnesses and then goes back to full brightness. And if you hold it down, you get scan lines. Now, scan lines aren't my thing, but some people may like it, and it does give a bit more of a feel of the original screen. Hold it down again, and it turns them off. That's really cool. So that's Ben's LCD replacement. Now look, I don't have a McWill modded Lynx, so I'm not going to make any comparisons between the two. However, as someone who picks up their Lynx probably once every 6 months, because that's all I've got time to do, $50 US is a slightly easier pill to swallow, and the improvements are just absolutely outstanding. Now, don't forget that this is a prototype. This is actually prototype 2, and he's waiting for boards to test with prototype 3 as we speak. I didn't show you the actual mounting because that's very much still a work in progress. He sent me those 3D printed bits, but that's all still being worked on. Ben does tell me though that there is, even when the scan lines are switched off, there is a slight scan line look about when you have block colors on the screen. But look, admittedly I don't have the best eyesight, but I swear Ben must have been looking under a microscope at the screen when he found that. Now, with being a prototype, I've only got a really basic LCD attached to this board while he still works out all the fine-tuning the electronics and so forth. But when it is in production, users will have a choice of 2 options. One will be a Chinese-made screen with Japanese glass over the top, and the other one will be a full high-quality Japanese screen with Japanese glass. So they'll be available. Now, as you watch this, Ben will probably be switching on the pre-orders for his website. So if you check the link down in the description, you can pre-order the screen and get your Atari Lynx looking fantastic. So, until the next video, see you then.